Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Darwinism Deselected Session 3. Today we are going to be covering the fossil record. Paleontology has been used as an argument for Darwinism for decades. We have been told the fossil record is evidence for Darwin. The fossil record is something that is undeniable, observable, clear, and something that cannot be denied. In fact, it's even gone so far as to make it as if the fossil record and Darwinism are the same thing. They're almost synonymous. It's almost like, don't you see the fossil record? What we're going to be covering today is actually something quite surprising, unsettling, you could even say. There has been a concerted effort, a pressure, a veneer of confirmation around Darwinism when it comes to the fossil record, but that is far from the actual facts. The fossil record does not actually support Darwin. It does not support Darwinism. It doesn't support neo-Darwinism. It doesn't support the main ideas that he predicted. What it does do is actually disconfirm his idea and Darwinism writ large. Now, when we think of the fossil record, we think of the deep time that we are looking at. We think of these amazing fossils, whether it's the trilobites or it's the Homo naledi, whatever it is, we look at this and we are fascinated, we are intrigued, we are taken back by the history that we're looking at. Yet, isn't it shocking that for decades the public has been misled and misinformed about the fact that the fossil record does not support Darwinism? Now, I want to highlight something which is really important. Darwin, from the onset, recognized the importance of the fossil record for his theory. Now, in the olden times, when you had these Victorian writers, and Darwin certainly was one of them, one of the great writers, in fact, of his era, to emphasize something, you would say it in Latin. And likewise, Darwin repeated throughout The Origin of Species a particular phrase. He kept emphasizing gradualism. He kept emphasizing the idea that there is a steady, incremental, slow increase in complexity. Natura non facit saltus. This is a really interesting Latin phrase he used repeatedly. What it simply means is nature does not make jumps. Natura non facit saltus. This is so clear in The Origin of Species. It is something that we should actually have written down and actually written it in gold and told people, look, this is what Darwinism is about. Because now the Darwinists are not going to be advertising this aspect of Darwinism like they should, because the fossil record does not support it. Now, the very first thing I did want to cover is the level of propaganda when it comes to gradualism, when it comes to this idea that the fossil record cannot have saltations, cannot have jumps, cannot have jerks. Now, Darwin didn't just say it in Latin, he obviously said it in English, and he explained what he meant. He says in The Origin of Species, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down, but I can find no such case. So on your slides, if you go to slide number 3, that's where you're going to see this particular statement. Now, I have given it the title Reversed Burden of Proof. As a recap, I did mention this previously. Why is this statement a very important philosophical statement from the perspective of shifting the onus of the burden of proof? And why is it that we have actually accepted this as the standard, as the normal, as something that we are supposed to be providing counter evidence to, as opposed to be actually asking the Darwinists to provide evidence for their theory. The reason is we simply have been socialized into accepting this particular idea. So I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Do you guys remember we covered this idea that Darwin reversed the burden of proof and why this is problematic? Does anyone want to share their thoughts on this? And is this point clear? If it's not clear, I can explain it again.
Put your hand up if you want to talk. Yeah, just give them weight spoon, wasn't it?
Well, effectively, all he's done is he's provided a new thing, and we've basically said, prove it. And all he did was, I can't prove it, but can you prove that it's not true? So effectively, he's just avoiding any sort of accountability on proving his new theory and just pushing it on us. And then, like, the people who heard that sort of just sat back and was like, actually, we can't prove that this completely new theory is not true, and just accepted that.
Yeah, absolutely. Think of this thought experiment. Today we've got the news that Hulk Hogan died. Hulk Hogan, the very famous wrestler. Now, if I am to make a statement like Hulk Hogan died, I haven't empirically verified that, but it's a pretty reasonable thing to believe because it's been reported by multiple media outlets. It's been reported by his former employers and so on and so forth. It's not a fact that I need to empirically verify. It's testimonial, but it's still a form of evidence, so it's fine. But when it comes to the fossil record, when it comes to life, when it goes back 4 billion years, and we're talking about particular processes and mechanisms and intricate details about them and speaking about them as if we observed them, then obviously we need a form of evidence. We simply cannot say to the evolutionists, to the Darwinists, well, so-and-so's Darwinist or paleontologist has actually said it, so we're going to accept it. We should rationally ask, how do we know this actually happened? And there's actually a trust deficit. There's actually a trust deficit when it comes to the public and the Darwinists because there's been a long history of propaganda. Now, if I'm to make an absurd claim and say Hulk Hogan didn't die of natural causes, whatever they're saying about him right now, I'm not sure, but let's just say I said he didn't die of natural causes. He was actually murdered by a jealous wrestler from the 1980s when they had a match and he lost, right? If I'm to make this claim, what's the normal reaction you would give me? What's the first thing you'd say to me?
What's the proof?
What's the proof? Excellent. What is the proof, Tariq? Yeah. What if I said to you, Tariq, the proof is this. If you cannot disprove the fact that he actually spent the majority of his life in the United States of America, and the fact that there must have been some people that may have been jealous of him, if you cannot disprove these two facts, then my proposition that he was killed by a jealous wrestler is most likely true, if not confirmed to be true. What would you say to that?
Please.
Right. Okay, yeah. You'd say?
It reminds me of Napoleonic law, where you're guilty till proven innocent. You know, it's just the reversal of how evidence works.
Yeah. But here I'm saying things which are consistent. I'm making statements which are consistent with my overall proposition. So my proposition is he was killed by a wrestler who he lost to in the 1980s. And since he lost to that wrestler, I believe that's a cause for him to be jealous and to go on and to kill. Now, you would say, well, what's the evidence for this wild theory? And I would say, I don't have any reason to doubt my proposition because We know he spent the majority of his life in America. We know there must have been other wrestlers who must have been jealous to him, and he wrestled a lot of people. Now, I've given you two facts here, and these facts are consistent with the idea that he was murdered, right? But they in no way, shape, or form actually make it more probable. So what you find amongst the Darwinists is when you say to them, the fossil record doesn't fit Darwin's ideas, they would say, surely it does. And if it doesn't, then you would find a rabbit in the pre-Cambrian fossils. They would give you something which at first pass sounds kind of rational, but actually is totally irrational. It doesn't actually make any sense. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand the burden of proof is upon them. The burden of proof is upon them. I had a brother recently come up to me and ask, this guy said this statement. He just made some sort of absurd statement. How do I prove him wrong? And I said to him, why do you need to prove him wrong? He's the one that made a statement. So if somebody comes up to me and says, the world is not real, or design is an illusion, or Trump used to be a waiter working in Japan, whatever, I don't need to prove him wrong. He needs to prove his point, because his point is counterintuitive, right? So it's not simply the case that whoever makes the claim, they have to actually justify. Whoever makes a counterintuitive claim or claim that's absurd. So when it comes to the fossil record, what we are told is, okay, so what's your alternative? Creation? What's your alternative? God? It's like, well, firstly, calm down and explain what's the evidence that the fossil record supports Darwin. They switch it and say, if you could demonstrate that one complex organ could not conceptually come together by these fine gradients, these fine, small incremental changes, if you can show anything in nature which could not possibly have come about by that mechanism, then I have a reason to doubt my proposition. But it's like, no, that's not the way it works. That is not the way it works. Right? Imagine someone walking around with the Vedas. I'm not saying Hindus do this, but say there's a Hindu preacher. They walk around with the Vedas and they try and claim Krishna is divine. And then you say to them, what's the evidence that he's divine? And then they say to you, why do I need to provide evidence that he's not divine? The mere fact that there are loads of people in India who believe that he's divine, and India exists as a civilization. Where can all these stories? You need to disprove the fact that he's from India, or that people don't believe it. And you think to yourself, how are these things linked? Like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be providing me evidence that this guy who you believe to be divine is divine. Instead, you're asking me to disprove that India exists, or that people believe in him, millions of people believe in him. It's just totally shifting the burden of proof and then asking you to falsify things, which even if falsified, like, they don't make a difference to this particular point because they don't support this point. It's a very subtle thing, but it's quite obvious what they're trying to achieve. What they're trying to achieve is, well, obviously, come on, all these paleontologists, all these fossil, come on, how can you deny this? Like, they all believe in it. Do we find rabbits in the pre-Cambrian fossils? No, we don't. Do we find this? There's a lot of hoodwinking going on. There's a lot of social pressure. Do you remember last time I covered some of the social pressure in academia to actually challenge anybody who doubts Darwin's theories? Now, I want you to go to the next slide, which is slide number 4. This is Darwinian alien logical deduction, right? So this is a screen grab I took from some old sci-fi film. It was on the internet somewhere. I think it's some maybe pre-1960s. So you have an alien who lands here on this planet, This alien does not understand our language. So he does not understand what we are talking about, what's in our books. He just comes down to Earth and he sees all of these people, and he sees elephants, and he sees bees, and he sees trilobite fossils, and he sees birds, and he sees all these amazing things in the ocean. Because this alien thinks in a very robotic way, and they have been programmed to believe in naturalism. We covered naturalism before, do you remember? Okay. So what conclusions would this alien make based upon having this idea of naturalism, having this idea that I have to break down everything, including fossils in particular? Say he just starts studying paleontology, just starts looking at fossils and stuff, and then looks at modern organisms which exist as well. What would be the conclusion of this alien based upon what he sees, if he's a naturalist?
You must have a common ancestor.
Must have a common ancestor?
Yeah.
Okay. Things going back, why?
Because of naturalism.
Yeah, because of naturalism, but why exactly?
Because so one of the reasons why all life must have a common ancestor, because life is so likely to form, because it's such a rare event.
Yes.
It must.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair, you remembered. It's such a rare event that they cannot go back and say there's multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I see an old friend I haven't seen since very long ago, mashallah. So what we have is we have a reason to believe that this alien is going to come up with some sort of tree of life, going to come up with some sort of very basic understanding, this gradual evolution, this gradualistic story. So this is a logical deduction of the fossils. Okay? Now, taking that into account, remember, evolutionary science is predicated on naturalism. Evolutionary science is predicated on naturalism. Naturalism is absolutely central to its ideas. If you go to the next slide, this is a shocking statement. This is slide number 5. This is a shocking statement. And this statement in of itself should be quite unsettling based upon what I said in the beginning, because what I said in the beginning is we are told to believe that the fossil record and Darwinism, they go hand in hand. They dovetail together. You could almost say hand in glove. Yet, in 1859, Darwin realized the fossil record is not something which supports his theory. The fossil record at first pass, apparently, if you look at it just the way it actually is, and the current understanding of the paleontologists that were alive at the time, the fossil record was a grave objection to his theory. And that itself shows you the level of propaganda that is involved, because most people don't know that. We were told in school, yeah, fossils, yeah, supported Darwin, yeah, all of that, remember, we've got a trilobite, we've got this, we've got that, all of this stuff fits really, really well. Darwin used fossils. Darwin was concerned. He actually wrote a chapter 6, called Difficulties of the Theory. And in this chapter, he outlines 3 concerns that he has about his theory. On this slide, I've only written down one of the 3 concerns. The other 2 concerns, inshallah, we're going to cover during the other sessions. Here's what he says. Long before the reader has arrived at this part of my work, a crowd of difficulties will have occurred to him. Some of them are so serious that to this day I can hardly reflect on them without being in some degree staggered. But to the best of my judgment, the number are only apparent, and those that are real are greater, not, I think, fatal to the theory. These difficulties and objections may be classed under the following heads. So this is the only one we're going to actually cover, not the other two. First, why, if species have descended from other species by fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Why is not all nature in confusion, instead of the species being, as we see them, well defined? And then he goes on to two other concerns that he has, which we will cover, inshallah, in future sessions. I just want you to think of something. He's pointing out something so obvious. He's saying, if my theory is correct, then we should be seeing transition fossils everywhere. But we are not. What is basically going on? Paleontologists at the time, they recognized that the fossil record does not actually support this idea of gradualism, this idea that everything has to work gradually, things are improving gradually. So Darwin recognized this, and this is why this particular worry of Darwin is known as Darwin's doubt. And it's actually the title of the famous book by Stephen Meyer, Darwin's Doubt. And if you think about the architecture of life, if you think about the beauty and the complexity and the diversity and the elegant engineering and the design, in this pageantry of life, the fossil record is the main thing that we are looking at. The fossil record is the most visible sign of life. And if the fossil record doesn't fit Darwinism, and Darwin knew about it, then the question that we should be asking is, why was the public misled? Now, rest assured, for those of you who are worried that Darwin, we're just going to end here and Darwin had his doubts and that's it. No, Darwin had some very interesting ideas to try and explain why this apparent discrepancy was in the record. Now, if you go to the next slide, let me just explain this doubt in a bit more detail. So this is slide number 6, biological classification. So the way that life has been classified, it's been broken into these different taxa, these different categories. We actually have kingdoms, that's the broadest category, then phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. If that alien that I spoke about before, if the alien turned up but was not allowed to look at any fossils, was not allowed to open up any book of paleontology, and the alien was asked to explain the origin of life and the development of life, the alien would actually make this picture inverted. You'd start off with very clear species, which are very simple, and then you'd branch off into other sort of species, and those would specialize, and you'd have a complete opposite picture to what the fossil record actually shows. The fossil record, and this is what was really worrying Darwin, the fossil record actually shows that the majority of the complexity of life came in a very short window in the history of life. Does anyone know this famous era that I'm referring to? Someone mentioned it last time. Starts with C.
Cambrian.
The Cambrian. Jazakallah khair. Think of it this way. Think of it like a clock. So on the clock, you have an immense possibility of development. If you think of each particular number, each particular hour, each particular minute, each particular microsecond, right, as the history of life. So this clock, 0 all the way to 12, this is representing the 4 billion years of life on this planet. According to that alien, life would evolve gradually, subtly, slowly, incrementally, ever so slightly, in a way that is clear in the fossil record. What we see instead is we see a massive jerk, a massive expansion. The term they actually use is an explosion. Imagine that in this 24-hour clock, in this 4 billion year of history, you basically have on that clock something close to a minute or less. Because it's an analogy, it's not exactly precise, but just think like a minute or less. In that time, the majority of life, the complexity of life, the beauty of life, the diversity of life, the elegance of life, the architecture of life came in that period. That's the exact opposite of what Darwinism says. It's the exact opposite. So the alien would not be drawing this particular picture that you see. The alien would be having a complete reversal. So you wouldn't start off like in the Cambrian. Here I've mentioned phylum. So the phyla, there's approximately 35 that we know of, and each particular phyla is very distinct categories with biological features and structures and traits which are unique to that particular category. So of the 35 phyla, imagine that approximately 20 came in the Cambrian, which is unbelievable. And then here's the shocker. Life didn't just appear abruptly. It stayed the same for a long time, a very long time, which they say stasis. And then it again changed rapidly. This doesn't make any sense from a Darwinian point of view. Now, what is that term I kept saying? The Latin term. I want you to memorize this because this is how you will send a shiver up the spine of any Darwinist. Just, and they're there in their pompous, whether you look at biochemistry or genetics or anatomy or physiology or morphology or bioinformatics or the fossil record, we know that Darwinism is true. Just look at them. Just look at them straight in the eyes and say to them, natura non facet saltus. See what's going to happen to them, right? Why is this Latin phrase so important? Nature does not make jumps. That's why Darwin said it at least 6 times in The Origin of Species. You write in Latin to do what? What did I say? Why do you write in Latin if you're writing as a Victorian writer?
Emphasis.
Emphasis. It's like the crux. It's like, you're giving a speech about Islam and in the middle of it, you say, La ilaha illallah. You don't need to translate. Everybody knows. So this is central. And the reason why it's central is because jumps, explosions, saltations, jerks, whatever you want to call it, any of these things, they actually do not fit at all with this theory. Remember what he said, going back to slide number 3. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Absolutely, he said. Thomas Henry Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog, he was quite worried at the time. He was a contemporary of Darwin and a friend. He actually said to Darwin, can you take this out of The Origin of Species? Can you basically get rid of this, right? Can you not make this so central to your theory. He denied that request and he reiterated, he reconfirmed, my theory would not work without this. Because he understood, if you have anything which cannot fit into gradualism, how is it going to work with natural selection and random mutations? Do you remember last time we spoke about mutations? One letter difference, right? You cannot have this type of evolutionary history. It cannot be anything but gradualistic. Okay. So if you go to slide number 7, what we actually find in the fossil record is this. Change, you can look at the change of the history of life, and time you can think of 0 to 4 billion. The yellow line, which is a linear line, is the line representing gradualism. What we actually find in the fossil record is, we actually find stasis. Things remain the same. Then we find they change. And they change in a way that's unrecognizable. Completely new species, new organisms, new body plans, new architecture, things are appearing. There's no transitions between them. This is totally bizarre, totally confusing. So the Cambrian was a big concern to the Darwinists in the late 19th century. And it actually got worse over time, as we're going to see. Now, this is something I want you to recognize. If you go to slide number 8, in the 4 billion years that we know life has existed on this earth, and this is why I said in a clock, it's like 1 minute of the clock that you're going to have these changes. Between 13 to 25 million years, that period, and the Cambrian took place around 530 million years ago, you find the majority of the phyla, the animal phyla, actually come together. So you will not actually have to go very far in terms of studying in paleontology before you start to recognize a pattern. Now, what is the answer of the Darwinists to this? We're going to go over their answer and why it's wrong later on, inshallah. But for now, I want you to recognize something. Now, this is just a standard book on the integrated principles of zoology, in which it says most major groups of animals appear abruptly in the fossil record, fully formed and with no fossils yet discovered that form a transition from their parent group. Darwin knew there is a huge concern that people have about my theory, and this is where I have to give a level of respect to Darwin that I would not give to Dawkins and Jerry Coyne and P.Z. Myers and these type of people. These people speak in a way that is categorical. They speak in a way that is very much misleading. It's clear. It's the fossil record. It's there. Darwinism is true. Darwin wrote about his doubts, and he wrote about solutions, which we're going to get into, and why those solutions and predictions turned out to be wrong. But he was very candid at points. And look at what he basically says. Consequently, if my theory be true, it is indisputable that before the lowest Silurian was another term for the Cambrian back then, now we say the Cambrian stratum was deposited, long periods elapsed, as long as, or probably far longer than, the whole interval from the Silurian age to the present day, and that during these vast yet quite unknown periods of time, the world swarmed with living creatures. Okay. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see the Cambrian, and the Cambrian is approximately 542 million years ago. It's just the fourth one from the bottom, okay? He's basically saying we basically don't have those fossils. However, What we should expect is between us today, alive, and the Cambrian, which is 500 something million years, the distance between the Cambrian and the origin of life should be about the same. And in between, the world should be filled with these varieties, with these transitions. But we don't find them. So he says, to the question why we do not find richly fossilivorous records of these vast primordial periods, I can give no satisfactory answer. Okay? That is brutal honesty. As we're going to see later on, he does actually give a prediction and he does actually give a potential answer. However, that answer is still predicated on his initial falsehood of inverting the burden of proof. He's still expecting, rather than giving evidence using the fossil record, he's saying, well, if you don't find this, if you don't find that. He shifted the burden of proof, and we've got a counterfactual. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, maybe this is what actually happened. Okay. Go to slide number 9, please. Just to explain the problem that Darwin has to explain away. This is what Jonathan Wells says about this, and he summarizes it really well. Darwin's theory predicts that minor taxonomic differences, such as species and genre, gradually evolve into larger differences, such as classes and phyla. Whereas the fossils shown that the phyla and many classes appear first and then diversified into a variety of genera and species. The fundamental issue here, as Wells is pointing out, is we have the fossil record upside down. If the alien that turned up was to actually analyze what is going on according to the Darwinian view of life, they would have made a fossil picture, a record, using their pen and paper, and they haven't seen a book of paleontology, they haven't seen the trilobites, they haven't seen any fossils. They would have drawn the exact opposite of what the fossil record actually shows. We would expect a top-down picture rather than the bottom-up evidence that we currently have. Things are literally inverted upside down. So we're not talking about there's some problems at a particular node of the fossil tree. There's a problem at a particular branch. We're talking about the whole picture's upside down. Now, this is really interesting, right? I actually learned this from Philip Johnson, who spent a lot of time looking into Darwin's writings. Darwin said, I didn't recognize how poor the fossil record was until I saw that it contradicted my theory. So you can see he wants to believe in his theory and he wants us to accept it, but from the very get-go there are problems. He writes, and this is slide number 10. But just in proportion as this process of extermination has acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on the earth be truly enormous. Remember, going back to his point about transitions. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Here's his grandmaster answer. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. What he's basically saying is, my theory, like the alien experiment I gave, it should predict this. Instead, we have that, right? We have, rather than what the alien would have written, according to the naturalistic Darwinian story, we have the fossil record upside down. He says, the explanation lies, I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. The record is basically terrible and it's misleading because things don't fossilize. 2, we haven't caught enough fossils. So later on, the Darwinists, they developed this idea of Darwin and they actually named it the artifact hypothesis. The artifact hypothesis, we don't have enough fossils. Fossils are rare because there's certain environments, there's certain deposits that cannot be preserved. The environment, therefore, does not preserve them, and therefore it's misleading. And this becomes his go-to point. This becomes his go-to point and the future Darwinists as well. And what they basically say is this: we can make these lineages, we can make these lines, these ghost lineages. We know that the fossils are there. We know that they're there. We just can't see them, and we will find them. We will find them when we actually go and study more and we get more samples. He writes, the geological record is extremely imperfect, and this fact will, to a large extent, explain why we do not find interminable varieties, connecting together all the extinct and existing forms of life by the finest graduated steps. He who rejects these views on the nature of the geological record will rightly reject my whole theory. Okay, I want you to focus on the last line. He who rejects these views on the nature of the geological record will rightly reject my whole theory. Please keep this in mind. Darwin kept fighting off this idea that I have to give up gradualism. He said, no, I will not give it up. I will not give it up. My theory doesn't work without it. The reason why I'm emphasizing this point through his writings is because today some Darwinists are trying to pretend as if gradualism wasn't that important. And it's okay. Darwin is the one who's basically doing takfir of you. He's the one basically saying, you get out my Darwinian camp if you don't believe in this. Okay? Now, you can see a graph there. I'm just reiterating. This is slide number 11. You have time, you have morphology, you have a very linear, clear graduation. But clearly that's not what Darwin sees, which is why he thinks this is a grave objection. Moving on to modern day Darwinists. Okay? Slide number 12. Dawkins, in respect to Darwin and his ideas, has not budged with gradualism. He's dying on that hill. And the reason he's going to die on that hill is because he knows it doesn't work without it. Natura non facit saltus. Nature does not make jumps. Why is that statement repeated? Because as soon as you allow that, naturalism is broken. You cannot have a mechanistic, naturalistic story with jumps and jerks. You cannot do that. So he writes in The Greatest Show on Earth, this is his main book on evolution. People think it's The Blind Watchmaker. It's actually this. He actually admits that The Blind Watchmaker didn't really have evidence. It's not, a lot of it, like I mentioned, a lot of it was speculation based upon some facts. In this book, he believes this to be a lot more evidence-based than that one. That one was a lot of hypothetical stories, explanations. And those explanations, remember we said just so stories. They just, maybe this happened, maybe that happened. Imagination. He writes, evolution is not only a gradual process as a matter of fact, it has to be gradual if it is to do any explanatory work. Why is that? Why is he writing this after the 150-year anniversary of the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859, in 2009, in his book, The Greatest Show on Earth? And by the way, 2009 is a golden year for Darwinists and for intelligent design proponents. That's when there was a flurry of books coming out on both sides, because there was the 150-year anniversary of Darwin's book and the 200-year anniversary of his birth. So that's my question to you. Why is Dawkins dying on this hill? Why is he saying evolution has to be gradual if it's to do any explanatory work? We covered it last time.
Is it because you'd have not deformations, you'd have the species would die out basically if it wasn't gradual. So the jumps would be too big.
That's one thing. Excellent. So you have, say you have mutations which are too many mutations, they are harmful to the organism dies. Remember I said there's 3 types of random mutations. What were the 3 types? Adaptive.
Okay.
Anyone remember? Adaptive, neutral, deleterious. Some are beneficial, some are neutral, some are harmful. Most are harmful. Darwin's theory, as it's espoused today, is dependent upon random mutations, which is so small incremental changes. So Dawkins' selfish gene idea goes out the window if you start believing in these jerks, these saltations. Okay? Now, slide number 13, I want to read out to you something really important. Now, Ernst Mayr, he admits, like some other Darwinists did, that the fossil record is not continuous, it's discontinuous. It's not continuous in the gradualistic way, it's discontinuous. Wherever we look at the living biota, discontinuities are overwhelmingly frequent. He carries on writing, the discontinuities are even more striking in the fossil record. This is well known and established. Now the problem is, how do we explain the gaps? Now, this is a question which I'm not going to answer, and I want you guys to answer because it's a philosophical point, okay? It is a very important statement. It's, in fact, one of the best statements that I came across when it comes to the fossil record and the way that paleontologists work. So Philip Gingerich says, gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence and not evidence of gaps. So this is slide number 13. Gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence and not evidence of gaps. What does that mean? Firstly, gaps of evidence, what does that mean? In the context that we're talking about now.
The missing gradual stages of the fossil record.
Okay, good. So you have a node here, we have a fossil of a trilobite or whatever, we have another fossil here or whatever, and there's no transitions that we have in the fossil record. We have a gap. He's saying gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence. They are not evidence of gaps. What does that mean?
He's believing it one way or the other. Like,
Huh?
he's going to believe it regardless. Like, it's...
Yeah, he's going to believe it regardless.
Is this a play on word on God of the gaps or something? Or, like, is he not referencing that?
It's the Darwinism of the gaps.
Okay.
Gaps of evidence that you have in the fossil record, he's literally telling you gaps of evidence is gaps of evidence. It's not evidence of gaps.
But that's just that I am always right.
Yeah.
But
Yes, no, that's the point. That is the way paleontology works. So this is why they say ghost lineages. That's an academic term. Ghost lineages. There's a fossil here, there's a fossil here. They link them.
That statement is not false, though. So,
It can't be falsified.
I mean, the statement of gaps of evidence is not evidence of gaps. That's not a problematic statement in
That's not.
itself. Yeah.
But the next statement in the context of science is quite problematic. Gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence. No one disagrees there. And not evidence of gaps. Is that falsifiable? He's saying the gaps are not there. We're missing the evidence, but there's no gaps. What does that show you about the lens?
It's like another sort of burden of proof type thing.
Yes.
It's effectively just saying, like, if you have to, if we have every single fossil record that's ever existed, only then can you show that there's a gap, effectively.
It's not even saying that. It's basically saying there is no such thing as a gap in the fossil record. I know we don't have the transition fossils. I know the whole thing's upside down, but it's not. It's not. The transitions are there.
the Philip guy that said it right, like, and as you've already said, it's not scientific anymore at that point, but he's presumably still thinks of himself as a scientist. Like,
He's a paleontologist, yeah.
but does he have a different falsifiability test that he puts forward? So I think you said Darwin said that, hey, if you were to find it something that couldn't have evolved gradually, that would disprove it, right?
Yeah.
So does he propose something else? He's very confident in the fossil record.
No, so
he doesn't propose anything.
So the two statements are not logically inconsistent.
Okay.
So you could say, if someone can find something that did not, some trait or some organism that could not have come together by natural accumulation of these small incremental changes of millions of years, and then say, it doesn't matter if we don't have the fossils, doesn't matter at all, we will find them one day, or the fossil record is imperfect. This statement will make you understand how paleontology works, how the fossil record works. Gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence and not evidence of gaps. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is because there's two murtads, of Darwinism, who basically in the 1980s broke rank from this. And they said a statement of kufr from a Darwinian perspective. They stated gaps of evidence are basically evidence of gaps. But they had a radical solution. And these two particular individuals are infamous in biology. They're infamous in biology. We're going to go over their story. They stuck to naturalism. They stuck to the best they could of Darwin. But we're going to see why they failed. Okay, next slide.
Sure. Yes. So, when it comes to the gaps of evidence and all that, if you imagine all of the species that exist in the world today and all the families in the tree of life and everything, to what extent do the neo-Darwinian evolutionists say that there are gaps of evidence? So do they claim that they have some intermediary fossils for some of the changes in species? Or do they claim that all of those intermediary fossils are gaps of evidence?
Okay, so that's a very good question. The way I'll explain it is like this. One of the examples that was given by a paleontologist was Leo Tolstoy's book, War and Peace. If you have, all of us here, we're given a copy of War and Peace, and there's a particular malfunction from the printers. So only 13 pages have ink on them. The rest of the pages are blank. And none of us have read the book before. And each one of us is given a copy, and then that copy has 13 pages which are printed on there, right? Now we have to infer the rest. Is that going to be speculative? incredibly speculative. That's the way that anthropology works. If you think of another analogy, if you have seen those YouTube clips where a person takes a picture of themselves every single day for 30 years, 20 years, you must have seen those pictures, 1, 2, 3, yeah? The fossil record, we are told, is as if you have a sequence of pictures and a few pictures are missing, when it's actually inverted. It's literally a picture at day 1 and a picture at day 1 million. They, at best, cannot say they are missing links. This is a very misleading term. The record is missing. 99.999% of species, and these are just estimates, probably more, that have ever existed are completely gone. They're extinct. We don't have their fossils. We don't have their DNA. We don't have anything. So what they do is they say, surely there is a link between all these nodes.
So, like, for example, in the case of human evolution, you've got, like, let's say, a squirrel-like creature, and then you've got, they call it plesiadapiforms, and then from the plesiadapiforms you have, like, you know, New Age monkeys, whatever. Then you have Homo sapiens after that. Now, this plesiadapiforms, there are no fossils of that. That's just kind of like an estimation as to what that thing is or what it looks like, and they've got these pictures that they envisage, and you know, it's like a bit like a big squirrel or something like that that's going up the tree. So that's an example of a gap. Okay, but my question is more like, okay, for example, you know, like a wolf or a dog or I don't know, a cat or lion or let's go even further than that and say, like, for example, the transition between the whale and the cow, you know, because they say it's in the same family. So do they claim to have intermediary fossils for any of those, or like, for example, the movement from the sea onto the land, the kind of wherever it is in the middle that they believe in?
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah. So they do point at certain things and say that is a transitional fossil. But there's a couple of problems with that. We have found them doing U-turns, and they've found that the descendants are actually older than the ancestors because they believe a particular story to be true. Now, as Richard Sternberg, he said, you know, when it comes to a cow becoming into a whale, it requires a lot more than shaving off its hair and chopping its legs, throwing it in the ocean, yeah? It requires a lot more. It requires, say, an incredible number of random mutations incrementally added. Something we're going to cover next week, not this week. This week we're just fixated on the fossil record, is how, when it comes to, we need millions of mutations to go from one organism to another. And this is all mathematical. This is population genetics. This isn't anybody's seen it. Not only do we need those random mutations, what we've found is completely bizarre things. They've estimated the human and chimpanzees had an ancestor 6 to 8 million years ago. But they've calculated that to get 2 random mutations, and remember, we need countless random mutations, 2 coordinated random mutations, which will switch a chimpanzee-like ancestor or a common ancestor, we don't know what it looks like, but that diverting into these 2 particular organisms, it would require something like 215 million years. But we diverted 6 to 8 million years ago. So we have the fossil record contradicting population genetics, contradicting molecular studies. We actually have molecular studies contradicting other molecular studies. And we actually have the fossil record actually being accessible to be read in multiple ways. So there's multiple layers of problems, but because what I want to do is, in this very specialist series for Sapience, I want to focus on one topic at a time, but that's going to be a very interesting one where population genetics completely contradicts the fossil record. And that's just one vivid example. 215, 16 million years for coordinating mutation. We need so many of these mutations, and we only have 6 to 8 million years. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg. As we're going to get further, you guys are going to see how much worse it's going to get. Okay, let's talk about this murtad now, right? Stephen Jay Gould. Stephen Jay Gould, very famous paleontologist. He became famous because he basically said gaps of evidence are gaps of evidence. They do actually refer to the fact that there are no transition fossils here. So remember I said the fossil record, according to Darwin, is assumed to be gradual, like that. What we see is the opposite. We see stasis, then we see punctuation, then we see a massive expansion in complexity. Then we see stasis. What he basically says is that picture is true. The transitions do not exist where we think they exist. And he comes up with a new radical theory alongside his co-murtad, Niles Eldridge, in the 1970s. And what they basically do is they come up with a new framework. And that new framework became known as punctuated equilibrium. And we're going to go over why it's quite problematic and it doesn't actually work. Now, what's interesting is all Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldridge are doing is they are simply saying, guys, can we stop reading into the fossil record and can we just deal with the data as it is, as opposed to making all these ghost lineages which don't exist. What's shocking is this is the 1970s. Darwinism has been taught to us in schools, universities, documentaries, on social media, and we've been brainwashed for so many years. And as far back as the 1970s, paleontologists were basically saying the fact that there is no transitions, the fact that we do not find gradualism is a secret of our field. His literal words are, Stephen Jay Gould, it's a trade secret of paleontology. There are no fossils, transitional fossils that we are claiming are there. All we have is the tips and nodes, and then we link these things up. Now, don't get me wrong, he does believe in transition fossils, but he believes they exist elsewhere. They don't exist where they think they exist. I'm going to read out something that he wrote in 1977. And by the way, something really funny we're going to get into. He got into a big fight with Richard Dawkins because Dawkins believes in gradualism and he believes in punctuated equilibrium. Now, gradualism is something that creeps on you like mold, very slowly. Punctuated equilibrium is massive jerks, massive punctuations. So these two camps came about in biology, and one became known as jerks and one became known as creeps. So that was like a very funny way of summarizing the discussion between the two. And that term, you still find it used, creeps versus jerks, right? So Niles Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould, they became the head of the jerks. And Dawkins and collaborators and the majority of the scientific community, they were creeps because they believe in gradualism. So whenever I refer to creeps and jerks, the two camps, jerks I'm referring to, punctuated equilibrium. And what's the other one? Creeps, gradualism. Okay. Now he writes, this is slide 14. And by the way, the history of this, the way that we're covering it, if I just go today and I say something about the Puranas or the Vedas or these types of things, I kind of have to explain what are these Hindu texts, where did they come from, who said what. In the same way, we're going through that history of paleontology and how things actually developed. So some of these statements are really important to understand the historical context. Gould writes, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. Remember what I said earlier, trade secret. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. Yet Darwin was so wedded to gradualism that he wagered his entire theory on a denial of this literal record. Just think about that. Then he quotes Darwin. The geological record is extremely imperfect, and this fact will, to a large extent, explain why we do not find interminable varieties connecting together all the extinct and existing forms of life by the finest graduated steps. He who rejects these views on the nature of the geological record will rightly reject my whole theory. Well, Niles Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould, they are going to do this, but they're still going to try and save natural selection. Darwin's argument still persists as the favored escape of most paleontologists from the embarrassment of a record that seems to show little of evolution. In exposing its cultural and methodological roots, I wish in no way to impugn the potential validity of gradualism, for all general views have similar roots. I only wish to point out that it was never seen in the rocks. That is propaganda. This is why Stephen Jay Gould is a whistleblower. He's a Judaist goat. He is somebody who, for the first time, what creationists and intelligent design people are saying today, he is the first credible paleontologist of that caliber to openly come out and say, by the way, guys, the fossil record doesn't fit gradualism. All this stuff in textbooks, all this stuff is not seen in the rocks, it's not actually there. And then goes on to write, paleontologists have paid a high price for Darwin's argument. We fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history. Yet to preserve our favored account of evolution by natural selection, we view our data as so bad that we never see the very process we profess to study. So he's lamenting this historical tragedy that paleontologists have clung on to with their teeth, Darwin's poor and absurd excuse of an imperfect geological record. And he's basically saying, look, guys, it's not going to work. We can't just keep saying imperfect geological record, right? So this is a really funny statement, right? This is a statement which is based upon an interaction, if you go to slide number 15, between Zhuan Yuan Chen. He's a famous Chinese paleontologist. Now, the Cambrian explosion cannot be viewed everywhere. On this planet, there's only certain parts which, due to geological regions, we have exposure. We have exposure, we can go into those deposits, we can find, and one of those is actually in China. So he's a famous Chinese paleontologist, and he actually came to deliver a lecture, and this is recounted in Stephen Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt. And it's a very famous incident. Famous as in the intelligent design community is famous. So Meyer writes, the Chinese fossils also helped to establish the Cambrian animals appeared even more explosively than previously realized. So there was little doubt about the significance of the discoveries that Chen came to report that day. Chen's the paleontologist. What was soon in doubt, however, was Chen's scientific orthodoxy. In his presentation, he highlighted the apparent contradiction between the Chinese fossil evidence and Darwinian orthodoxy. As a result, one professor in the audience asked Chen, almost as if in warning, if he wasn't nervous about expressing his doubts about Darwinism so freely, especially given China's reputation for suppressing dissenting opinion. I remember Chen's wry smile as he answered. In China, he said, we can criticize Darwin, but not the government. In America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin. This, I thought, was a really telling statement because there are so many biologists, there are so many people who study in this field who self-censor. And if you have someone who is self-censoring, it's more difficult than being told to shut up because you just have this thing. Now, the clearest example of self-censorship is people who work in finding fossils and actually putting them up in museums and these types of places. Some of the statements of these curators of these museums, you will find they will say statements that makes you think, okay, what is going on? Gareth Nelson is one of them. And he famously said about when they link fossils to other fossils, he said, they have to be there and these are the best candidates. Like literally, you look at we have this fossil, we have this bone, we have this particular, gate that we can infer from this particular organism. Okay, this has to be linked to this has to be linked to that. And what I want to cover is actually when it comes to paleontology, when it comes to this particular field, there are people out there who can actually put their entire lives at risk, their academic lives at risk, because they do not want to subscribe to this Darwinian view. Now, if you go to slide number 17, there's a German biologist you can see there, Gunter Beckley. Gunter Beckley in 2009, he was a Darwinist. He was a Darwinist working away in Germany, in Stuttgart, and he was actually working at the museum. It was 2009, the 150-year anniversary of The Origin of Species being published. His job was to actually put together, and he's a world-class paleontologist. You will find his stuff everywhere. You'll even find him in documentaries, right? So in 2009, what he did is he wanted to put together an exhibition and he wanted to show just how dumb the critics of Darwin are when it comes to the fossil record. So he wanted to put together some medieval scales. And the medieval scales were going to have Darwin's books and then the books of intelligent design proponents and these critics of Darwin. And then he was going to show how the scales are heavy in favor of Darwin and these books are just filled with nonsense. However, he made a fatal mistake. And he made a mistake which was going to cost him a lot. He decided to read the books of the intelligent design proponents critiquing Darwin in terms of the fossil record. And he started doubting. And he actually started stating his doubts publicly. What happened? He was sacked. He was dishonored. He was attacked by his colleague. He is someone that you'll find his interviews online. He talks about how other paleontologists contacted him and said, yeah, we also have doubts. And he decided to double down and he lost everything. His prestigious career, you will find peer-reviewed papers. You will find him you'll find him as a world-class paleontologist. Why else is he putting together the exhibition for Darwin? And the biggest exhibition apparently in Europe at that time, in Germany. What happened? He apostated from Darwinism. And he basically said, the fossil record doesn't fit. There's actually serious problems. And these guys actually have valid concerns. So do you guys remember I mentioned the artifact hypothesis a few slides back? What was the artifact hypothesis? It was the excuse that Darwinists come up with why there is no transition fossils, right? What was the hypothesis?
Not everything fossilizes and we don't have enough fossils.
Good. Not everything fossilizes, we don't have enough fossils. So it's either due to the imperfect fossil record, or it's due to undersampling. We don't have enough samples. Okay. There is a huge problem with that. The huge problem with that is two things. The first thing, Stephen Jay Gould, we can extrapolate from him. If you say the fossil record is imperfect and we haven't done enough, okay, how does that in any way explain the fact that species remain the same for millions of years, which is not supposed to happen? You have stasis. And as Gould says, you're going to see on slide 16, stasis is data. Things remaining the same, you can't just ignore it. It's a counterfactual. The second point is Darwin said, don't worry about it, guys. We're going to find the transitional fossils. Don't worry about it, guys. Everything is just fine. It's been more than 150 years. What we've actually discovered is a lot of fossils. Even though the fossil record writ large is missing, we still have discovered a lot of fossils. We've discovered something quite peculiar, quite interesting, quite uncanny, which is we keep finding the same fossils. We keep finding the same fossils. So the way that point, the artifact hypothesis, has been refuted is something known as the collector's curve. The collector's curve, imagine all of us here, we're walking on the beach, okay? We're walking on the beach and we come across a starfish fossil. Like, okay, that's interesting, starfish. The next day we walk and we find a trilobite. Like, oh, it's a trilobite, it's different. The next day you walk, you find something else. For 1,000 years you're walking and you find random fossils that don't fit any particular pattern because the fossil record is so imperfect. What we're finding is the opposite. And if you go to slide 16, we're finding, using a collector's curve, that the fossil varieties taper out over time. On the y-axis, you have the types of fossils. On the x-axis, you actually have time or effort or number of fossils collected. According to the Darwinian view, it should be a linear relationship. What we're finding is a little bit of effort and then you have the flattening out straight away. We're finding again and again the trilobites, again and again the trilobites, again and again the trilobites, again and again the starfish, again and again the starfish. You're like, what the hell is going on? What the hell is going on? It's not random. You can't say the fossil record is imperfect. You keep finding the same things. So, the collector's curve is evidence that the fossil record, yes, is imperfect, but it doesn't fit the random pattern that Darwinists would expect us to believe in. Yes. Maybe take the mic.
Yeah, you know, from the earlier argument that fossilization doesn't happen so easily, right? Could they not just argue the reason why you're finding so many starfish and the repeat fossils again and again is because for some reason or another, those animals in particular are very good at fossilizing?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they say that. The problem with that is because if we take their premise and we just play around with it, we should still find a level of randomness. We should still find a level of randomness. We don't find that level of randomness. We actually find that you find the same things again and again. Now, we have actually discovered, if you go back to slide number, and that's an excellent question, by the way, if you go to slide number 8, can you see that we have the Holocene, which is 10,000 years ago, the Pleistocene, and so all the way back. Now, 500 something million years ago, you have the Cambrian. Underneath the Cambrian, you have some strata. do you know that we have discovered fossils in those strata? And fossils which are smaller than the Cambrian fossils. So their excuse of, but maybe the strata before the Cambrian did not have the ability to preserve the soft tissue organisms which existed, we can say to them, what are you talking about when the fossils that are preserved in the pre-Cambrian before the explosion are smaller and softer and more delicate than the actual fossils in the Cambrian? So if anything, if what they're saying is true, then what we should find is we should find a lot more. It's actually, they don't realize they're actually causing a problem for themselves. We should have more transitions in the pre-Cambrian than even the Cambrian, because in the pre-Cambrian we can see simpler stuff. We've even been able to see to the level of the nucleus in terms of a fossil. That's how well the fossil record, when it does actually show you stuff, that's how well it can actually show you. So that excuse actually doesn't work. Now, Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldridge, they are actually going to bite the bullet, and they're basically going to say, we are not going to accept this gradualism, but we're not going to give up on naturalism. See, this is what they want to do. They don't want to give up on naturalism, but they want to give up on gradualism. And we're going to look into what they basically say. Okay, now if you go to slide 17, Gunter Beckley, he basically says, if the gaps and discontinuities in the fossil record were just artifacts, remember the artifacts hypothesis that we spoke about, they should more and more dissolve with our greatly increasing knowledge of the fossil record. But the opposite is the case. The more we know, the more acute these problems have become. Darwin's doubt about the Cambrian in chapter 6 did not get smaller over time, but bigger. And if he were still alive, he would likely agree the evidence simply does not add up, since he was much more prudent than many of his modern followers. Now, I wanted to reach out to Gunter Beckley to interview him. Sadly, he passed away just a few months ago in a car accident in Germany. But he's got fantastic articles and he's got fantastic videos on the topic. He's actually left a legacy in terms of, he's created a huge mess for the Darwinists. They're going to be cleaning up the mess that he's left behind for a number of decades. Okay. Now the slide number 18, these are the murtads. This is Niles Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould. These are the guys who are basically saying, okay, guys, there is no gradualism, but we don't have to give up on what? Naturalism. So they're saying there are transitions. But the way it works is this. Things remain the same. There is a massive punctuation event. And these fossils, because this punctuation event is so fast, there's hardly any fossils, and those fossils don't get, there's hardly any organisms there compared to larger populations. Therefore, they're not fossilized. And that's why they're not there. So they came up with an elaborate explanation. We're going to go into why it's wrong, but that's basically their explanation. Now, they write, Christian Schwabe, he's a evolutionary academic. He basically writes in an article, again, that Latin phrase, natura non facit saltus. This phrase is so popular, there's actually the name of a scientific paper, Nature Does Not Make Jumps. Darwin thought that organisms would change imperceptibly as a function of time, but that idea was based upon a mechanistic model that has been inspired by the ways of animal husbandry. The fossils, however, have always shown an abruptness at the inceptance of species that was usually explained by an incomplete fossil record. The intermediaries that were needed to smooth out the relation between reality and model have remained elusive. But like I said, 150 years of propaganda, right? Under the pressure of data, a group of Darwinians broke rank, murtads, with the mainstream and designed a scheme that would combine periods of stasis with spurts of rapid changes called punctuated equilibrium. Now, I want you to focus. The reason why I'm reading out these quotations to you, I want you to focus on the propaganda, all right? Look at line number 5 or whatever it is. 3. The fossils have always shown an abruptness. So when these intelligent design proponents are screaming, this is what's going on, they're like, no, a bunch of creationists. No, we're not going to listen. Now they're saying, okay, we are simply going to bite the bullet and say, this is what happened. The transitions are not there because the transitions happened in a very short window because of 2 processes that we're going to go over. And because they happened at such a short window, we don't have their fossils. So you're literally saying hundreds upon hundreds of millions of transition fossils that you drew in your ghost lineages for 150 years, this is all a lie. And now you're giving us a radical theory. Not 150 years, 120 years, because this is like 110 years. This is like 1970s when they came up with this theory. Still, 110 years of propaganda. Okay, now, this is crazy. Pre-1970s, before punctuated equilibrium, Darwinists said, we expect millions upon millions of transition fossils. They predicted by a theory. Why can't we find them? Artifact hypothesis. Artifact hypothesis fell out the window because of the collector's curve, right? And the Precambrian strata. Now, punctuated equilibrium has a new prediction. Their new groundbreaking prediction is we shouldn't be finding transition fossils. We shouldn't be finding them. It is, in fact, a confirmation that we have not found them. This is what they're saying. Now, why did Dawkins go to town against Gould? Why did the 2 camps fight? The classic Darwinists, which are the majority, tried to fight these Protestants, these heretics. Think of it like the Catholic Church and the Protestants, right? The Catholic Church, who interprets the Bible? Who?
Clergy.
The clergy in particular? The Pope, who's divinely inspired, right? Protestants say who can interpret the Bible?
Yeah.
Anyone. So Gould is saying we can interpret evolution without Darwin. Dawkins is saying, no, we're going to stick to the church fathers. We're going to stick to what? Gradualism. That's their tawheed. Gradualism. Natura non facit saltus. Nature does not make jumps. Okay. Now, if you go to slide 19, have a look at that picture. The top picture is gradualism of Darwin. That is gradualism of Darwin. Everything gradualistically, the tree of life. Have a look at that crazy picture underneath it. Stasis, punctuation. Stasis, punctuation. Stasis, punctuation. Okay. Now, the creeps are going to attack the jerks. And the creeps are going to say, we have a mechanism. Our mechanism is natural selection working on the individual organism. That's our imagination. That's our story. What do you have? What do you have? And Stephen Jay Gould, he alongside Niles Eldridge and the people who started following them, they proposed 2 mechanisms for this crazy picture that you see. And the 2 mechanisms, which is why we don't have transition fossils, right? And we're going to go over those two mechanisms. But before that, I'll read out to you what he actually says about this. Gould says, I count myself amongst the evolutionists who argue for a jerky or episodic rather than a smooth, gradual pace of change. In 1972, my colleague Niles Eldridge and I developed the theory of punctuated equilibrium. We argued that two outstanding facts of the fossil record. Now, concentrate on this. This is super important. If you don't understand these points, you're not going to understand the rest. Two outstanding facts of the fossil record. Geologically sudden origin of new species and failure to change thereafter, stasis, reflect the predictions of evolutionary theory, not the imperfections of the fossil record. Now listen, I spend a lot of my time doing tafsir of these texts. They're sitting there thinking like, what does it mean? Yeah. What does the last line mean? I want you to indulge in this writing. Yeah. What does the last line mean? I want you to read it out. Yeah. I want you to read into it. What does it say? We argue that two outstanding facts of the fossil record, sudden changes and stasis, reflect predictions of evolutionary theory, not the imperfections of the fossil record.
Is he saying that like the fossil record is correct?
Yes.
And this this theory fits it.
There you go. MashaAllah.
Oh, so you're making the fossil record the asal and then...
Yeah. Exactly like you said. Jazakallah khair. I'm glad, in my very solitary life, someone's looking into this with me, yeah? Sometimes I get really excited and then like, even my wife told me, don't talk to me about Darwin. So basically, he's saying, brothers, yeah, look, stop saying the fossil record's imperfect. The fossil record is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The artifact hypothesis got a kick in the shin by the collector's curve. It got punched in the groin by the pre-Cambrian strata. And then these guys came and did a chokeslam. They said, we don't need the artifact hypothesis. Just throw it out the ring. Forget the artifact hypothesis. Imperfection of the geological record, gone. They've made a falsification into a confirmation. Okay. Anyway, how did they do it? Slide 20. Slide 20. The first thing they did is they came up with a radical idea, which is this. Heliopatric speciation. By the way, there's no evidence for this. Remember I said, this is now a rap battle of imaginations. You got the Darwinian gradualists, now you got the punctuationists. They're just seeing whose story fits. Not even the data. Because the data, like I said, is malleable. The disconfirming evidence of the fossil record has now become the confirmation. So heliopatric speciation. What it basically says is this. When you have a large population of, say, sheep, one of the sheep develops a mutation, a random mutation, which gives it more fur, not fur, wool. And that sheep is more likely to survive. How long will it take that trait to spread through the population? It's going to take tens of thousands of years, millions of years, right? Because there's only, in the population of sheep, there's only one sheep that developed it. And the population is very large compared to the one mutation. So what they said is this. Imagine an ancestral population, which is why you see that wilderness. And imagine that a bunch of sheep became geographically isolated because they went into a particular mountain passage and the rest of them, 99% of the population stayed. 1% went into this area and they became separated. Or there's a landslide or there's an earthquake. For whatever reason, some of the population became separated. Now, in this population, which is much smaller of sheep, one of the sheep develops a mutation, a random mutation for thicker wool. It's going to spread faster in that small population than it is going to in a larger population, which is why evolution has to work very gradually there. Here, that's what happens. And then this evolution is rapid compared to this evolution. I know you're underwhelmed. That's basically the first idea. Now you can see on the right, I've got pictures of the mutations. I've got pictures of the DNA, right? Now, is it true conceptually that in a larger population, it takes a longer time for mutations, random mutations to get fixed, to settle, to spread through the population? Is that true? That's true. Okay. Is it true in a smaller population, a random mutation, which is adaptive, is more likely to spread? Is that true? Yeah. Even according to them, it's true. However, the camp which is against them, who are known as
Creeps.
the creeps have a very simple answer to refute them. The answer is randomness. For you to develop an adaptive trait, because remember, adaptive traits which are beneficial, mutations which are beneficial, are rare. Most are deleterious, dangerous, harmful, or neutral. Most. So in order to give a solution for rapid evolution, they decided to take sheep here and said, evolution is going to speed up because there's less sheep. And the creeps can reply to them, yeah, but there's less random mutations. See our dilemma? So that basically didn't work. That solution didn't work. In fact, the creeps gave such a good answer that the jerks actually decided, do you know what? You're right. It doesn't work. But we have another solution. The solution we have is, what happened was, those traits that were adaptive, that you had the random mutation that came. This population is spread those traits during the periods of stasis. And then the standard creep reply is, but that goes against your ideas that we can find transitions, because you said transitions are not fine because it's a shorter period. If you increase the period, you're back to square one. So basically, allopatric speciation, two ways it doesn't work. It completely fails. What's powerful about this, I haven't found anybody saying this, but it's just a thing I was thinking about, is what's the evidence for it in the first place? It's just thought experiments. It's literally thought experiments against other thought experiments. Okay, the next idea that they came up with was a crazy idea, which is this. Darwin's idea was, is sheep competing against other sheep, or sheep competing against wolves? As in the wolf is going to try and attack the sheep and one of the sheep runs faster so it can survive, or it's the sheep versus the environments, individual selection. They said, to speed up evolution, because remember they have to explain the eruptions, the volcanic eruptions and complexity and diversity and elegance and architecture. So they think, what if natural selection doesn't work at the individual level, rather is groups of sheep competing against a completely different species? What if it's species selection? Again, it's a thought experiment. What if it's actually species selection? You have a bunch of species which are selecting out each other, and one group dies, one group is successful. So rather than individual organisms dying, you can get massive amounts of groups of organisms dying, and then other species arising, and you get this rapid evolution. Again, it's a thought experiment. And the basic answer to this is so simple. It's so simple, and it's so hard-hitting. What did we say in the beginning? The majority of life in a clock, it came in the 1 minute. So if you have a nice round clock in the first roughly minute, you get the majority of life. For species selection to work, you would need the fossil record to show a whole group of species developed from other groups of species. So you should have, before the Cambrian, which is the massive expansion event, you should have, for each phyla, for each category, each taxa, you should have a massive amount of species, but they don't exist. But you also told us the fossil record is not imperfect. So species selection actually generates a massive conceptual problem. Now remember something, all of these are thought experiments. There's no evidence for this. These are all thought experiments. So species selection also failed. What did that lead to? That led to Stephen Jay Gould groveling and going back to the end of his life. In fact, this is his book, The Structure of Evolutionary Theory. He wrote this book in the year that he died. He went back to classic neo-Darwinism and he said these mechanisms, he admitted these mechanisms don't work.
Brilliant.
Yeah. These mechanisms don't work.
He also believes the other ones don't work.
Which ones?
The neo-Darwinists.
No. He went back to, he whatever. He just went back. He said neo-Darwinism. He initially he came up with his own ideas. He did this, he did that. Now he just went back to classic neo-Darwinism. The problem is he just exposed a massive problem in the fact that the public was misled, the fact that gradualism is not in the fossil record, all of these things. It's like you open up this massive conceptual problem and you don't provide a solution, then you die.
You may tell back.
Okay. I do want to highlight something. George Gaylord Simpson, 100 years after Darwin. Why? I just knew these guys are going to laugh. It's just the name.
What was his name?
It is a feature of and this is strange, 100 years after Darwin, it's a feature of the fossil record, of the known fossil record, that most taxa appear abruptly. They are not, as a rule, this is slide number 22, led up by a sequence of almost imperceptibly changing forerunners, such as Darwin believed should be usual in evolution. Blah, 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 blah. You guys, it's just there for your reference. This was known 100 years after Darwin. This is my issue that I've been saying from the beginning, and this is why I gave you the example of the Chinese scientist. I gave you the example of Gunter Beckley, who was, forced out of his job, all these things. Why do they lie to the public? It's a patent lie. The fossil record supports Darwin. It's a patent lie. 100 years later, you have someone who's the head of the, not head, he's one of the most important people in the modern evolutionary synthesis, saying this. It doesn't fit.
Then Eldridge also on Telba.
We don't know.
Did he die?
I don't know if he died. He might be alive. He might be alive.
Does he still promote this?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The thing is, I'll tell you one other thing I've come to realize about this field, yeah? Every single subfield of evolutionary theory is now becoming into its own area. Bioinformatics, population genetics, and all of this. But ultimately, it's still based upon the same ideas of gradualism, of naturalism, of these mechanistic, reductive ideas. That's one thing that's common amongst them all. And on this particular page number 22, you're basically going to see another quotation where is from some book, Critical Transitions in Nature and Society. What they're basically saying is the Cambrian explosion was real. This whole idea that it wasn't real and there was this other stuff going on. No, they're saying it is actually real. And this is a 2009 publication. Now, we're going to go on to creeps versus jerks, which is slide number 23. Now, who won in the end amongst the creeps and the jerks?
Peace.
Creeps won. Okay? The creeps won. But I want you to realize something. The creeps winning is not a victory. It's what they call in a Pyrrhic victory. Is it a Pyrrhic victory where you win in a way that Pyrrhic, yeah. How do you say Pyrrhic? Oh, the P silent.
Yeah, no, it is a P.
Pyrrhic.
Yeah, Pyrrhic.
So explain what that means. That's like a victory, which is it costs you.
Yeah, so it's a
Pyrrhic. I think it's called Pyrrhic.
No, it's Pyrrhic.
Pyrrhic. Oh, it's Pyrrhic. Yeah.
It's
I love that term though.
so it's like when you win a huge war, but you get very little in return. Like,
yeah.
So, for example, you 100 million people died or something like that, but what did you get in return?
Yeah,
maybe two blocks of or 200 kilometers of land or something like that. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not
it's like the Nazis. They level the United Kingdom, and they managed to inherit little. That's like, it's basically like useless victories.
I got a question though. Right?
Just before that,
yeah.
That's what happened with creeps and jerks. This episode weakened the creeps because all of this stuff came out in public, which is why I believe Dawkins was very upset at Gould and Eldridge and others.
You know how like you kind of formulated it in a way that you've got like, the creeps on one side, the gradualists, and then you have like the jerks and Gould who made Toba and they came back to his old ways. And my question is like, so you present it in a way that you've got like, a handful of scholars on one side and a handful of academics on the other side.
I would say majority on the other side.
Yeah, but it's the loud voices are a handful. Like you mentioned Dawkins, you mentioned a couple of, and then Gould and Eldridge, you mentioned a couple of.
They're minority, yeah.
So when we talk about minority and majority, what numbers are we talking about here? Like how many people are actually talking about this? Because is it just the propagandists? Is it just intelligent? I mean, is it just Gould? I
don't know the numbers. And you asked me this last time. It'd be a good study from a culture point of view at the numbers. The only anecdotal thing I've ever heard when it comes to these types of things is Dennis Noble saying something to the effect of 99% of biologists don't agree with him. And
And how do they define a biologist? If someone's got a PhD in biology and he's got peer-reviewed works in biology?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another thing. People like Dawkins has been called the science journalist by E.O. Wilson and others because he's just like not finding out new stuff. He's just propagating old stuff. He's just learning stuff and then just teaching it. So an active biologist, I would say an active biologist is a biologist. It's someone publishing papers, not someone who's done a PhD and then left it for 10 years. How many are there? How many are Darwinians? How many are gradualists? How many are creeps or third wave evolutionists? I think it's so hard to gauge. It'd be interesting to find out.
And another point on that is that, let's say, for example, you've, for the sake of argument, got like 5,000 biologists who are writing in papers across the scientific field, and peer-reviewed, whatever it is. And maybe, I don't know how many like really respectable ones there. We know Nature, the Science Journal, like there's a few really respected ones. But maybe there's, 200, 300, I'm just guessing. It's more than that, maybe even. Like that deal with science, biology, evolution, or something like that, which would be looked at. When they say that, okay, well, this many people are the majority or whatever like that, that would include somebody who's just, let's say, for example, finishes PhD or he's doing his PhD or something like that, or someone who's just peer-reviewed, he's got peer-reviewed papers, but then that person might have a viewership, if you like, of 20 or 30. Like, for example, he might put his or her findings on one of the obscure science journals, and that so obscure has got a readership of 100. Like the amount of people that would have referenced this person is 1 or 2, and the amount of people that would have read his works is about 100 or 200. So we'd still put them in the count of the majority of academics who believe in evolution. But when in reality, there's like a few names, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, who are making the loudest noise.
Yeah.
Is that a correct representation?
I would say that's one way of looking at it. And it can be quite misleading because Dawkins is not a pioneer in the field. He's seen as a pioneer in the field. People who are pioneers like Lynn Margulis Lynn Margulis, her theory of symbiosis, it was not to be published. She kept fighting to get it published, and finally it got published. And the reason it got published in the end, the reason why it was delayed is because it went against neo-Darwinism, and she was a big critic of neo-Darwinism. Barbara McClintock, super important. 1930s and 40s, she discovers a counterintuitive, non-Darwinian evolutionary process, which totally is the opposite of random mutations and natural selection. Totally opposite. It's an intelligent process. She discovered it, ignored her. Her work wasn't published. He was ignored. 1980s, she won the Nobel Prize for that. Since then, she's been ignored, and her student James Shapiro is still alive today. He's ignored because their process goes totally against the norm. I actually interviewed James Shapiro about this, right? And he said something to me that's so bizarre. I interviewed him about evolution, this particular book, which is Evolution, A View from the 21st Century, Reinforced. So this is a big fat version of his book, and he's in his 80s now, right? So I asked him why he wrote this when he wrote a much slimmer version in 2011. That was the first edition. And that first edition was a hit in terms of the radicals, the apostates, and these types of people who are against neo-Darwinism, right? So I was kind of like just asking the question from a, just to make conversation. And this is on my YouTube channel. You're going to see this isn't like me just putting words in his mouth. He said it went out of print. And how can it go out of print when it's electronic and it's taken off online? I said, okay, why do you think that is? And he said there was an effort to subdue my work. So then I published a second version. I want you to think about that. This is not someone who believes in intelligent design. This is someone who believes in naturalism. He's Barbara McClintock's student. Barbara McClintock won the Nobel Prize. James Shapiro's work since the 1990s has been world class. He had to literally republish this. I want you to consider something. Remember I said in the beginning, if you go back to slide, check this out, go to slide number 9. Can you see there? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. These are the taxa, the classification of life. Every single biology book in the world goes over kingdom or domain, another word for it. You have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay. This particular first category of kingdom or domain, we used to believe there was 2 types, bacteria and eukarya. Bacteria, eukarya. From bacteria, eukarya, that's how the tree of life begins. Carl Wohl's was a maverick evolutionary biologist who discovered the 3rd domain of life, which is why he's going to go down in history books. He's died now, and he lived a very long life. He discovered the 3rd domain of life, which is known as archaea. So he discovered something which has made him legendary in the field of biology. He said about James Shapiro's book, this book is a game changer. And he was against. Like, one of the saddest things for him was that the culture, the monopoly of Darwin was not overthrown. Okay? Imagine a book endorsed by the man who discovered the 3rd domain of life being ripped online. So when Hijab earlier was asking about mavericks and people that publish and certain people putting their names forward, James Shapiro, Carl Wohl's, these are the people who've contributed in a way that you cannot compare with the likes of Dawkins. You cannot compare. Yet they put him at the forefront. They make him a scientist as if he's like the best guy. I was watching a stupid talk where in front of a live audience, someone said, this other academic said, oh, if aliens come to Earth, then Dawkins will be our representative for humanity. A type of worship. Anyway, let's go to slide number 23. We're near the end now, guys. Okay. Dawkins makes a statement, and I want you guys to do the explanation with me, to do the interpretation with me, what he actually means. Creeps versus jerks, right? It is as though they, meaning the fossils, were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. Remember, we're supposed to be creationists, right? We're the villains in their story. Both schools of thought, punctuationists and gradualists, despite so-called scientific creationists equally, despise so-called scientific creationists equally, and both agree that the major gaps are real, that they are true imperfections in the fossil record. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian era is divine creation, and both reject this alternative. Okay, guys, why did Dawkins write this? Why is he saying this statement? This is such an important statement. He's basically saying, shut up, you creationists, gradualists and punctuationists, creeps and jerks, gradualists and punctuationists, we both believe in the imperfection of the fossil record. We both believe that this is missing or that's missing. We both reject divine intervention. Why is he saying this?
Because he's a naturalist.
Oh, he's a naturalist?
Oh.
Yeah, go
on.
This is the last question I'm going to ask you before we end. So you give it your best shot. Think about it. Think about it. Why is he saying this?
I mean, the longer answer is he's a naturalist. He has to stick to that, and he has to make sure that there's no door left open for God to ever creep in.
Yeah, that's clear. But there's something more subtle. Sometimes, guys, and I want you to do this, yeah, and Hijab, I'm sure, does this with his Kalam stuff, right? His Kalam cosmological argument stuff. You sometimes have to read a text, a manuscript, written by, say, the main person in the field. And Dawkins is one of the main guys. And then not read what's there, but read what's not there. You know, in Sherlock Holmes, I don't know if anyone remembers that detail. It's like negative observation, right? Which is not a clue, but the fact that the dog didn't bark, so he knew the person that walked in to murder. It's like an omission. So it's not a clue. It's like what's not there in the details. Something so important, and it's a really good point to end this session on. Why is he saying this?
I'll try to put my detective hat on. So
I want, others to try as well.
Yeah.
No, after you.
Okay. 2 points, right? One, he puts his so-called enemy side by side with him. It's almost like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So he doesn't agree with the jerks, but he brings them into the conversation, say, look, we acknowledge all these errors. Not errors, but all these gaps in the record and so forth. And even the guys that we disagree with, even they assert or confirm that, we still reject the creationist narrative. And I think what you are alluding to with the omission or the missing part is that by including his so-called enemy in it and acknowledging all of the gaps in it, he conveniently left out that there's actually a lot of other voices that dissent or don't agree with this view. And so he paints a picture that, look, whatever you guys think, regardless, even the people that disagree with us, supposedly the only one that disagrees with us, even they still reject the creationist narrative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though Dawkins had a altercation with Gould, they went against each other. There was a massive fight that you will find in the 80s and the 90s, and then Gould passed away, I think, maybe around 25 something years ago, this legendary battle between the creeps and the jerks. He brings them in and says, we will not accept creationism because they need to keep a united face. You will also find statements from Gould saying, these creationists, they're quoting me, and they're quoting me as if I don't believe in transitions, but I do believe in transitions. What's basically the most important for them is saving face publicly. That's what's important to them. They have to maintain the naturalistic line. Dawkins and Gould are willing to flirt with the evidence in a way that is unceremonious and undignified, but they will not give up their underwear. They will not expose their aura. They will not give up on naturalism. That is their religion. They'll get drunk, whatever, this person does this. They will not go past a certain red line. And that red line is what? Naturalism. Now, going to my last slide, unscientific naturalism. Here's what's been going on, guys. To end upon, I want you to think of something. The fossil record doesn't fit Darwin's theory. Darwin says it doesn't fit my theory. Darwin basically says you guys need to go and accept the fact that this record doesn't fit my theory, but that's because I didn't recognize how imperfect the fossil record was until I saw it contradicted my theory. We will find those fossils. We will find those transitions. What happens? They hide it. They actually hide it. They don't tell the public they haven't found the fossils. Then what do? Some break rank and they basically say, forget finding transitional fossils. We should not find them. That is the actual prediction. So we have denial, we have cover-ups, we have U-turns, we have people who run away from gradualism, then come back to Darwinism, and they basically enter the orthodoxy again. So the only way to summarize this is Darwinism is dead in the fossil record. It just doesn't have the dignity to lie down. The fossil record, this amazing insight into life's architecture, its beauty, its complexity, its diversity, its elegance, its design. This pageantry of life that we see in front of us in fossils. And what does Allah say in the Quran? Travel the earth and see how life began. This beauty has been restricted because of the Darwinian natural lens. And until that lens is there, the evidence will always be covered. So what we've covered today is the fossil record. And we are actually going to be looking into the fossil record and its contradiction with actually genetics. Next week, inshallah, everything good I have said is from Allah. Every mistake I have made is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.